sweetheart. Deliveries go to the back." The words dripped with condescension, landing harder than they should have. Naomi smiled anyway, because she'd heard worse from people who should have known better. But as laughter rippled across the marble floor, no one noticed the phone she was holding. The one engraved with the company's initials. The one that belonged to the man whose name crowned the building. By the time those glass doors opened and he said her name, slow, deliberate, unmistakably personal, every smirk in that lobby would die in their throats. Stay with us. Because what begins as mockery ends in a moment no one will forget. The girl they laughed at, the one they told to use the service door, was never delivering lunch. She was delivering a lesson. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. And tell me this, have you ever been underestimated and let silence do the talking until the truth walked in with your name on its lips? The morning light poured through the cafe window, painting soft gold across Naomi Carter Hayes's table. She sat alone, stirring her coffee absently, the quiet hum of city life unfolding around her. Footsteps on pavement, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of conversation. Her world was small in that moment. A to-do list folded neatly beside her cup, a half-eaten croissant, and the phone on the counter that wouldn't stop buzzing. It took her a second to realize it wasn't hers. The vibration carried the faint rhythm of Nathan's ringtone, a steady, confident pattern she knew by heart. She smiled and reached for it. The sleek black device looked oddly out of place next to her worn leather purse. Of course he'd forgotten it. He was flawless at the big things, multi-million-dollar mergers, keynote speeches, even remembering the names of people others dismissed. But sometimes the little things slipped through his fingers like sand. Naomi glanced at the lock screen. 3 missed calls, 2 messages. She could picture him now, somewhere in his glass-walled office, patting his pockets between meetings, realizing his lifeline to the world had been left behind. She laughed softly under her breath. "Nathan Carter," she whispered, shaking her head. "You'd lose your head if I didn't keep it on straight for you." Outside, the city glimmered with late morning light. Delivery trucks honked, suits rushed by, and somewhere above it all, her husband's company towered over downtown, a vertical monument to his ambition. Carter Global Logistics. The name alone carried weight, whispered in boardrooms and printed on steel shipping containers that crossed oceans. To most of the world, Nathan was a visionary. To her, he was just the man who still burned his toast and left wet towels on the bed. She gathered her things with a quiet efficiency born from years of grace under pressure. Her outfit was simple: jeans, white sneakers, and a loose blouse that moved with her when she walked. She hadn't dressed to impress anyone. She didn't need to. But as she caught her reflection in the cafe window, brown skin radiant against the soft blue of her shirt, curls tucked neatly beneath a silk scarf, there was an ease in her beauty, something that couldn't be dimmed by understatement. Naomi slid Nathan's phone into her purse, along with a small paper bag, the lunch he'd forgotten too. "He'll probably skip it for a meeting," she murmured, smiling to herself. But she went anyway, because that was who she was. The quiet rhythm behind his brilliance, the calm in the noise. Outside, the wind carried the smell of roasted coffee and rain on concrete. She pulled her jacket closer and started the short walk toward Carter Tower. The building rose like a blade of glass against the skyline, its mirrored surface catching every shade of light. She'd been there 1,000 times before for charity events and shareholder galas, yet today, dressed simply and walking in alone, she felt almost invisible. When she reached the lobby, she paused for a moment at the revolving doors. People streamed in and out, executives, interns, messengers, all moving with purpose. Somewhere at the top of that tower, Nathan was preparing to lead another meeting that would make headlines. She smiled softly at the thought, gripping the phone tighter in her hand. This wasn't about status or appearances. It was about love in its simplest form. A woman showing up for her husband, unnoticed and unannounced. She didn't know that by the time she walked out again, her name, her quiet, unassuming name, would echo through every corner of that building, and no one would ever look at her the same way again. The skyscraper loomed ahead, slicing through the midday sky like a mirror to the sun. Carter Global Logistics stood as a monument to power and precision, Nathan's vision made tangible. Every pane of glass gleamed so sharply that the city seemed to bow in its reflection. Naomi paused outside for a moment, the cool wind brushing her cheeks, and stared up at it. She had attended countless events here, always arriving in sleek cars and silk gowns, cameras flashing, champagne waiting. But today, dressed in denim and sneakers, she felt the quiet thrill of anonymity. The revolving doors whispered as she entered. Inside, the air smelled of polished marble and expensive perfume, humming faintly with the rhythm of success. The lobby stretched wide and gleaming, with chandeliers that looked like frozen rain and walls lined with art that screamed modern restraint. Every sound echoed, heels clicking, voices murmuring, phones ringing, and somewhere beyond the glass elevators, the world pulsed with movement and ambition. Naomi's steps were soft, careful. She carried Nathan's phone and the small lunch bag like a peace offering, the corners of the paper slightly wrinkled from the warmth of her hand. She approached the front desk where two women sat behind computers, their manicured nails tapping in sync. Their posture was perfect, their smiles polished to professional brightness, warm enough for clients, cold enough for everyone else. "Good afternoon," Naomi began gently, her tone kind but clear. "I'm here to drop something off for Mr. Carter." The receptionist on the left, Clara, didn't bother looking up. Her blonde hair was wound into a severe bun, her lipstick immaculate, her voice dripping with disinterest. "Deliveries go through the service entrance," she said flatly, eyes glued to her screen. Naomi blinked, caught off guard by the quick dismissal. "Oh, it's not a delivery," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm of someone used to being underestimated. "I just need to leave something for him personally." Clara's fingers froze over her keyboard, and for a split second, annoyance flickered in her blue eyes. She finally looked up, gaze sweeping over Naomi's outfit with subtle disdain, the jeans, the sneakers, the absence of a designer label. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We get that a lot," she said. "You'll need to sign in with security if you're here to make a drop-off." From the second desk, the other assistant, Melissa, her brunette hair glossy and curled at the ends, leaned in. "Who should I say it's from?" she asked, her tone too sweet to be sincere. Naomi hesitated for just a moment. She could have said Mrs. Carter. She could have said his wife. But she didn't. "Naomi," she said simply. "He'll know who I am." Melissa's brow lifted, her lips twitching with amusement. Clara gave a small laugh under her breath. "Right," she murmured, pretending to type. "Of course he will." Naomi stood quietly, her grip on the phone firm but relaxed. There was no defensiveness in her posture, only patience. Around her, the lobby moved on as if nothing had happened, people coming and going, the elevator chiming softly every few seconds. Yet she could feel the weight of their glances, the subtle judgment that comes when people decide who you are before you speak. Clara's voice broke the silence again, casual, dismissive. "Look, we can't just call the CEO because someone says they know him. If you leave it here, I'll make sure he gets it." Naomi's gaze lingered on her for a moment, not hard, not pleading, just steady. "Thank you," she said quietly. "But I'd rather wait." She stepped aside to the seating area, the marble floor cold beneath her shoes, and sat down near a tall plant that brushed her shoulder. She folded her hands around the phone and exhaled slowly. Above her, the glass ceiling shimmered, sunlight catching on every surface. Somewhere in one of those top floors, Nathan was working, unaware of what was unfolding below. How the woman who shared his name was sitting just meters away, mistaken for someone paid to run errands. And though the air in the lobby hummed with whispers and glances, Naomi Carter Hayes sat perfectly still, her poise untouched, because she knew who she was. And soon, everyone else would too. Naomi rose from her seat when the laughter started. It wasn't loud. Just the kind of laughter that slips out between whispers, sharp enough to cut through the silence but quiet enough to pretend it wasn't cruel. She approached the desk again, calm as ever, holding Nathan's phone in one hand and the small lunch bag in the other. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice steady, warm. "I'm not a courier. I just need to drop something off for Mr. Carter. He left his phone at home." Clara looked up with exaggerated patience, as if she'd been interrupted mid-thought. "You and everyone else," she said, lips curling into a smirk that didn't reach her eyes. Beside her, Melissa leaned in close, pretending to type but barely containing a grin. "The delivery girl's shooting her shot," she murmured, not quite under her breath. The two shared a quiet giggle, their manicured fingers tapping the counter like punctuation marks of mockery. Melissa leaned her elbow on the counter, lowering her voice just enough for the words to sting. "You know, this kind of persistence might work somewhere else, but this isn't that kind of office." Naomi blinked, once, slowly. The kind of blink that wasn't confusion. It was control. She had met people like this before, people who mistook simplicity for insignificance. She didn't bristle or bite back, she simply tilted her head, her tone still kind. "Could you please let him know Naomi is here?" Clara rolled her eyes dramatically. "Mr. Carter isn't to be disturbed during meetings," she said, flipping through her appointment book as though reading from a script. "You can leave the phone here, and we'll make sure it gets to him, when he's free." Behind her, Melissa giggled again, whispering something Naomi couldn't quite make out, but didn't need to. She caught enough of the word desperate to understand. The comment stung, but only for a second. Naomi straightened, meeting Clara's gaze with quiet grace. "I'll wait," she said simply. Clara's smirk faltered, just slightly, thrown off by the refusal to bend. "Suit yourself," she muttered, returning to her screen. Naomi stepped back again, finding a quiet corner near the window. From there, she could see the entire lobby, how the sunlight poured in through the glass, how reflections danced across the marble like water. Her reflection stared back at her faintly, soft and composed, a reminder of her mother's voice echoing in her mind. "Never let them tell you who you are, baby. You show them." She watched people come and go, men in tailored suits, women with clipped voices and polished heels, all moving as if their time was more important than anyone else's. None of them looked at her twice. To them, she was part of the background, another delivery, another face to pass by. She could feel the weight of their glances from the front desk, the hushed whispers they thought she couldn't hear. But she didn't shift, didn't fidget. She crossed her legs neatly and folded her hands in her lap, every inch of her body language composed. Half an hour. The air conditioning hummed. The elevator doors opened and closed, sending gusts of cold air each time. A security guard passed by, offering a polite nod, the kind you give someone who doesn't belong but isn't causing trouble. Naomi smiled faintly and nodded back. She thought of Nathan upstairs, how focused he must be, how he'd probably laugh about all this when she told him later. Still, a small ache stirred in her chest, the familiar kind that comes from being unseen. She had walked into rooms before where people didn't expect her to belong, but it still amazed her how easily some people revealed who they were the moment they thought you didn't matter. From the desk, Clara's voice floated again, dripping with amusement. "She's still here," she whispered. "Must really need that tip." Melissa laughed softly in response. Naomi exhaled, her composure unshaken. She glanced at the elevator doors, polished to a mirror's shine. Any moment now, she thought. The world had a way of balancing itself out, of showing people exactly who they'd been laughing at, and when that elevator finally opened, she knew the balance would shift. She just had to wait. 4. Naomi moved to the lounge area, her steps slow and deliberate, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. The sound of her sneakers against the marble echoed faintly, a quiet rhythm against the chatter of the front desk. She sat down on the edge of a cream-colored sofa, the kind designed for people who never really waited long. The phone rested in her lap, both hands folded gently over it. It was warm from her touch, a small connection to the man who had no idea what was happening just floors above. The lobby was a study in stillness. The air was cool, perfumed faintly with eucalyptus and money, sterile, perfect, unwelcoming. A fountain murmured in the corner, the soft trickle of water masking the sharp tones of Clara's voice as she answered a call that didn't exist. The Naomi could hear the faint laughter that followed, the clipped whispers meant to sound casual but carrying just enough to reach her ears. Melissa lowered her voice. "It's kind of sad, though, don't you think? Waiting around like that?" Clara snickered. "Please." She's probably hoping to hand it over herself, get noticed. Some people love playing damsel. Naomi's spine stayed straight, her shoulders relaxed but composed, the way her grandmother used to tell her, "Don't let them see you shrink, baby. Not for anyone." The words had carried her through boardrooms, family dinners, and too many moments like this, moments when she'd been mistaken for something smaller than she was. A security guard walked past again, giving her a polite nod and a faint, almost pitying smile. "You doing okay, ma'am? Need me to check if someone's coming down?" he asked, his voice kind but assuming. She returned the smile with gratitude that didn't reach her eyes. "No, thank you. I'm fine." He nodded again and moved on, his footsteps fading toward the elevators. Naomi drew a slow breath, eyes fixed on the shimmering elevator doors. Her heartbeat was steady, even as the air thickened with discomfort. She'd been underestimated before, by men in boardrooms, by women in boutiques, by people who mistook quiet for weakness. But she knew something they didn't. Silence had weight. Patience had power. She adjusted the paper bag beside her, smoothing its creased edge. The faint smell of Nathan's lunch, rosemary, lemon, a touch of garlic, filled the space around her like a whisper of something human in a place built on performance. Minutes stretched thin, every tick of the oversized wall clock amplifying the slow erosion of patience. A group of interns passed by, their laughter bright and nervous as they carried stacks of files toward the elevator. One of them looked at Naomi, then at the phone in her lap, and whispered something that made the others smirk. She caught fragments. "Delivery girl," waiting for her tip. But she didn't flinch. Her calm was armor, smooth and impenetrable. Outside the glass walls, the city kept moving. Taxis honking, people crossing streets, sunlight glinting off the river in the distance. Inside, time had its own cruel pace. Naomi's reflection shimmered faintly in the marble floor. A poised silhouette, legs crossed neatly at the ankle, face serene but unreadable. She thought of Nathan again, how he'd tease her for not calling first, how his laugh always softened the edges of a bad day. He had no idea the woman he loved was sitting in his lobby, being mocked by his own staff. And she wouldn't tell him. Not yet. because the truth had a way of revealing itself at the right time. The laughter at the desk faded to typing and silence. The air felt heavy now, almost expectant. Naomi didn't move, didn't look their way. She just sat there, composed, graceful, waiting for the sound she knew would come. And then, faint at first, the soft chime of the elevator cut through the stillness. A pause followed. A hush swept the room like a held breath. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the phone, her gaze lifting. The balance, she felt, was about to shift. Melissa's heels clicked softly across the marble as she approached, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield of authority. Her smile was rehearsed, the kind that belonged more to a stage than a face. "Hi there," she began, her tone syrupy enough to stick. "I just wanted to help clear things up. We can't exactly call the CEO every time someone claims to know him, you understand?" Her voice dropped into something meant to sound gentle but came out condescending. "Why don't you just leave the package, sweetheart? We'll make sure he gets it." "Ma'am," Melissa continued, her tone now tinged with impatience. "We have very strict security procedures here. If we called Mr. Carter every time someone walked in claiming to know him, he'd never get any work done." Naomi met her gaze evenly. "I understand," she said softly, "but he really will want to see me." Clara snorted audibly this time, abandoning the pretense of professionalism. "That's what they all say," she muttered, shaking her head. "You'd be surprised how many people think they're the exception." Melissa's eyebrows arched, surprise flitting across her face before dissolving into amusement. She turned slightly, glancing toward Clara, who was already watching with a smirk. "Right," Melissa said, drawing out the word. "I'm sure he's expecting you personally." The way she said it made the sentence sound like a joke, and the laughter that followed proved it. It was small, sharp, and cruel, a sound that sliced through the quiet air of the lobby like paper tearing. Clara pretended to be busy, eyes flicking over her computer screen as she murmured something Naomi couldn't quite hear. Melissa chuckled, tossing her hair over her shoulder as if this moment were just entertainment to pass the time. A couple of people waiting near the elevators turned their heads, curious. The sound of laughter, no matter how soft, has a way of drawing an audience. Naomi's fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the phone. Her chest rose and fell slowly. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger would have given them power, and she refused to let them take that from her. Instead, she did what she'd been taught from girlhood, to hold her head high even when people tried to push it down. A man in a gray suit stepped out of the elevator just then, glancing at the small scene as he adjusted his tie. His expression flickered between curiosity and discomfort before he looked away. It was easier that way, for everyone, to see something unfair and pretend it wasn't happening. Naomi lowered her gaze, not out of defeat but discipline. Her voice remained even. "I see," she said simply. The faintest smile tugged at her lips, one that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, something in her stillness unsettled them. Maybe it was the way she didn't fidget or defend herself. Maybe it was the quiet dignity that filled the space where anger should have been. Melissa straightened awkwardly, as though she'd expected Naomi to crumble, to argue, to prove herself. But Naomi gave her nothing. The silence stretched. Then Clara's phone rang, a real call this time, and the sound startled the moment apart. She snatched up the receiver, speaking too loudly, too fast, as if to erase the tension. Naomi turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the elevator. The mirrored doors gleamed under the lobby lights, reflecting a distorted version of her, small, still, and waiting. But inside that reflection was a steadiness that the others couldn't see. Melissa huffed, muttering something about wasting time, before retreating to her desk. The laughter had stopped, but its echo lingered in the air, sour and thin. Naomi exhaled quietly, smoothing the lunch bag beside her. Her pulse was calm now, steady as the ticking clock overhead. She knew she didn't have to say anything. She didn't have to prove a thing, because life had a way of revealing truth, often when people least expected it. And just as Melissa sat down again, tapping her pen against the clipboard, the elevator chimed once more. The sound was soft, but it carried, and this time it changed everything. The laughter died the instant the elevator chimed. A soft, metallic note that cut through every whisper, every click of a keyboard, every sound that had filled the lobby moments before. Heads turned instinctively toward the sound. The glass doors slid open, revealing Nathan Carter, tall, calm, deliberate, as though the world had been holding its breath for him. His suit, a deep charcoal perfectly cut to his frame, seemed to absorb the light around him. The kind of man who carried presence the way others carried oxygen, effortlessly. Clara straightened so fast her chair creaked. Melissa froze mid-sentence, clipboard pressed against her chest like armor. This was the man whose name adorned the building, whose decisions rippled through industries. To them, he wasn't just their boss. He was gravity itself, pulling every conversation, every ambition toward him. Nathan stepped out of the elevator, still mid-call, his tone clipped but controlled. "I don't care what the projections say, David. Run the numbers again." His gaze swept the lobby as he spoke, scanning faces, movements, the rhythm of his domain. And then, as if some invisible current tugged him, his eyes landed on Naomi. The shift was instant. His shoulders softened, and the edge in his voice dissolved. He paused mid-sentence. "I'll call you back." He lowered the phone slowly, the faintest trace of a smile forming as he crossed the polished floor toward her. The room fell into absolute silence. No one moved. Even the fountain in the corner seemed to hush. Clara's jaw slackened. Melissa's eyes darted between them, disbelief widening by the second. Nathan's steps were unhurried, confident but warm, like a man walking toward something, someone that grounded him. Naomi rose from her seat, her face calm, her eyes steady. For a moment, everything around them blurred into stillness. Naomi. Her name left his lips like a chord struck in the quiet, a sound that pulled every gaze in the room toward him. The confidence in his tone, the ease of it, the affection woven through each syllable. It didn't belong to a CEO addressing a stranger. It belonged to a man greeting someone who held his whole heart. Nathan crossed the lobby with purpose, his stride smooth and deliberate, his expression softening as he neared her. The change in him was almost startling to those watching. The sharp authority they were used to, the brisk, commanding presence that ran entire departments, had melted into something warmer, more human. "I was just about to contact you," he said, reaching for her hand as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You brought my phone?" Naomi nodded, the faintest smile touching her lips. "And your lunch. You left both behind." A low chuckle escaped him. "You save me again," he murmured, taking the phone and placing it in his pocket before leaning down to kiss her cheek. It was a simple gesture, no spectacle, no hesitation, but the sound it left in the air was louder than any apology Clara or Melissa could ever give. The entire room froze. Clara's mouth fell open, the polite smile she'd worn earlier now stiff on her face. Melissa's clipboard slipped from her hand, landing on the marble with a sharp, echoing clack. One of the interns near the elevators blinked like he wasn't sure what he'd just witnessed. The air changed, electric, heavy, laced with disbelief. Nathan turned slightly toward the front desk, still holding Naomi's hand. "I hope they didn't make you wait long," he said. His tone was gentle for her, but beneath it ran a current, one that carried the unmistakable edge of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Naomi's eyes flicked toward Clara and Melissa, who both looked like they wished they could vanish into their screens. "It's fine," she said softly. "They were busy." Nathan's brow furrowed just enough to show he understood exactly what that meant. Busy? He let the word hang for a beat, turning it over like something sharp on his tongue. "With what?" Clara's voice cracked under the weight of his gaze. "Mr. Carter, we thought she was a delivery girl?" Nathan's tone was calm, almost conversational, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "Interesting." The word lingered in the air, sharp enough to make Clara flinch. The polished marble floor suddenly seemed to reflect too much light, too much truth. Nathan turned toward Naomi, and just like that, his entire presence shifted. The authority in his frame softened as he looked at her, his voice dipping to something quieter, gentler. "Did they give you trouble?" Naomi's expression stayed calm, her eyes steady. "Nothing I couldn't handle." But that wasn't enough for him. He saw the flicker behind her composure, the kind of quiet restraint only someone deeply self-disciplined could hold. His jaw tightened, a small pulse visible in his temple. "That's not the point." The words were low, controlled, but they carried the weight of a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. He turned back to the front desk. "Clara, Melissa." He didn't raise his voice, yet somehow the entire room seemed to lean in. "My wife should never be treated as an inconvenience in her own building." The silence that followed was suffocating. The air conditioning hummed faintly in the background, the only sound brave enough to exist. Melissa's eyes darted toward Clara, her lips parting as if to explain, to fill the void, but no words came. Clara swallowed hard, her face pale, her professionalism stripped bare. "Sir," Melissa started, her voice trembling, We honestly didn't realize." "That's the problem," Nathan interrupted, his tone still measured but mercilessly clear. "You didn't need to realize who she was to treat her with respect." His gaze swept between them, not angry but deeply disappointed. "You judged her before she spoke. You decided who she was before you knew her name." Naomi watched him quietly, her fingers brushing over the edge of the lunch bag she still held. She didn't want this scene, she never did, but she also knew this wasn't really about her. It was about something bigger, the way people used their assumptions like mirrors, only seeing what they wanted reflected back. Nathan took a slow breath, grounding himself before his next words. "This company bears my name, but it stands for both of us. Every person who walks through those doors, client, employee, or guest, should be treated with the same level of decency. No exceptions." Clara's lower lip trembled. "It was a misunderstanding," she whispered. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. "No, it was a misjudgment." The truth of it sank into the room like gravity. Even the receptionist from across the hall, who had pretended to be busy sorting mail, froze mid-motion. The entire lobby seemed to shrink under the weight of exposure. Naomi stepped closer to Nathan then, her presence quiet but grounding. "Nathan," she said softly, a gentle reminder that grace was stronger than punishment. He turned to her, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "You shouldn't have had to stand here like this," he murmured. Naomi's hand rested lightly on Nathan's arm, her touch steady but unyielding. "It's okay," she said softly, the warmth in her voice wrapping around the tension like silk. The words weren't an excuse, they were release. Around them, the lobby felt frozen in time. The hum of the lights, the whisper of the fountain, the distant clicking of keyboards, all of it dimmed beneath the gravity of her calm. Her gaze shifted to Clara and Melissa, who stood behind the counter as if the marble might swallow them whole. Naomi's expression was composed, her tone level and free of judgment. "We all have moments we wish we handled differently," she said, her voice carrying through the quiet with effortless grace. Today was one of yours. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't gloating. It was truth, spoken softly, but with the weight of wisdom. The words didn't strike. They settled. Mercy, when given so freely, has a way of stinging sharper than scolding ever could. Clara's eyes flickered, glassy and uncertain, while Melissa lowered her head, her shoulders collapsing under the gentleness they hadn't earned. Nathan glanced down at his wife, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. Pride glimmered behind his composed expression, a quiet admiration that said more than words could. He'd seen her navigate rooms filled with powerful people, command meetings with calm precision, and handle conflict with unshakable poise. But this grace in the face of humiliation, was something rarer. Naomi turned back toward him, her fingers brushing his sleeve lightly. "Let it go," she murmured, not as a plea, but as a choice. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. He could have made an example of the women standing before them. He could have fired them on the spot, and no one would have questioned it. But she was asking for something higher, for dignity over dominance. Nathan nodded slowly, the anger in his jaw softening into something deeper. He looked back at the two women, who now seemed impossibly small against the gleaming glass walls that had once made them feel powerful. "You're fortunate my wife is more forgiving than I am," he said quietly. "Learn from this." "Yes, sir," Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. Clara managed a small nod, eyes fixed on the floor. Naomi gave a single nod of acknowledgement, neither dismissing nor dwelling. "We all start somewhere," she said, the edges of a faint smile touching her lips. "Just make sure you grow from here." With that, she turned toward the elevator, her hand finding Nathan's once more. Together, they crossed the polished floor, the sound of their steps echoing softly through the lobby. Every pair of eyes followed them, some in awe, others in shame. But Naomi didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her calm presence lingered behind her like perfume, reshaping the air itself. Nathan guided Naomi gently toward the elevator, his hand resting at the small of her back, a gesture that spoke not of possession, but of quiet reverence. The polished floor mirrored their steps as they moved together, a seamless rhythm that contrasted sharply with the stunned stillness that had fallen over the lobby. Every eye followed them, but no one dared to speak. The laughter that had once filled the space had vanished completely, replaced by something heavier, silence thick with recognition, guilt, and awe. Naomi didn't look back. She didn't need to. The power in that simple act, walking away without the need to justify, to lecture, to linger, was louder than anything she could have said. The marble walls, which had earlier echoed with whispers and smirks, now carried only the sound of her footsteps, soft, certain, and final. Nathan's presence beside her was grounding, steady. He didn't rush her, didn't try to shield her. He simply walked with her, hand still resting at her back, the gesture both protective and proud. The faint hum of the building returned, the buzz of fluorescent lights, the hum of air conditioning, but underneath it all was a new rhythm, quieter and sharper, the kind that lingers when people are forced to see themselves clearly for the first time. At the front desk, Clara and Melissa exchanged a glance. Disbelief, shame, and a flicker of something that might have been admiration passed between them. The glossy surface of the counter reflected their pale faces at them like a mirror they hadn't asked for. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was exposure. They had built their confidence on hierarchy, on the small cruelties that made them feel significant. And now, stripped of that illusion, they were left with nothing but the echo of their own behavior. Melissa opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. Clara's eyes were still fixed on the elevator, her throat tight, her hands twisting the edge of a file folder that no longer felt like a shield. Around them, the few onlookers who remained kept their heads low, pretending to read emails or check messages, though the glow of their screens did little to hide the unease in their eyes. Naomi reached the elevator and turned slightly toward Nathan. He pressed the call button, his hand brushing hers in a small, unspoken reassurance. The stainless steel doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing their reflection. Two people who had just dismantled an entire unspoken hierarchy without raising their voices. Nathan stepped aside for her to enter first. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Naomi nodded, her expression serene. "Better than they are," she replied, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. There was no bitterness in her tone, just truth. He let out a slow breath, something between pride and humility crossing his face. "You handled that better than I would have." She glanced up at him, warmth in her gaze. "That's why we balance each other," she said softly. The doors began to close, and through the narrowing gap, Clara and Melissa caught one last glimpse of them. Nathan's calm strength, Naomi's effortless grace, the quiet dignity that filled the space where ego once thrived. When the elevator sealed shut, the sound echoed like punctuation at the end of a lesson learned too late. For a long moment, no one moved. Then quietly, Clara sat down. "We really messed up," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Melissa nodded slowly, her eyes glassy. "She didn't even need to say a word," she said, "just walked away." And somehow, that was the part that stung the most. Because in that walk, in her silence, Naomi Carter Hayes had reclaimed more than her dignity. She had taken back the room itself, leaving behind not humiliation, but a reminder that grace, when wielded right, was the strongest power of all. The elevator opened to the top floor with a soft chime, the doors parting to reveal the sweeping expanse of Nathan's office. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below, the skyline glittering like a river of light. It was a space built for decisions and dominance, clean lines, dark wood, the kind of view that reminded everyone who held the power. Yet, in that moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, softened by the woman who stepped into it beside him. Nathan set his phone carefully on the edge of his desk and turned toward her. For a beat, he just looked, really looked, at her. The same woman who had just walked through humiliation and emerged untarnished. The same calm that steadied him in every storm. He reached out, drawing her into his arms, the tension he'd been carrying dissolving the instant she leaned into him. "You could have called," he murmured, his voice roughened by restraint. "I'd have come down myself." Naomi smiled, her head resting lightly against his chest. "I know," she said simply, "but then they wouldn't have learned anything." He exhaled a low laugh, half admiration, half disbelief. "You always see the bigger picture." She pulled back enough to meet his gaze. "Someone has to." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held warmth, the kind that spoke of years of partnership built on balance. His fire, her stillness, his authority, her grace. Together they made something unshakable. Below them, the city pulsed with movement, tiny figures crossing streets, lights blinking like heartbeat monitors. But within the tower, a different current was spreading. The story was already alive. It whispered through hallways, slipped between desks, hummed across chat threads and coffee breaks. The scene in the lobby had become legend before lunchtime was over. No one spoke Nathan's name first when they told it. They spoke hers. Mrs. Carter. The woman who had been mistaken for a delivery girl. The one who hadn't shouted, hadn't demanded, hadn't needed to. Her composure had carried more weight than any reprimand. And in every retelling, the tone changed, from gossip to reverence. On the lower floors, Clara sat at her desk long after her shift had ended, staring at the reflection in her dark computer screen. For the first time in her career, she couldn't find the words to defend herself. Melissa, beside her, typed and deleted an apology email 6 times before closing her laptop altogether. There was no sentence that could undo what had been seen. Back upstairs, Naomi walked toward the window, the city's glow reflected in her eyes. "They'll remember today," she said quietly, "not because of what happened, but because of what didn't." Nathan joined her, his reflection beside hers in the glass. "You mean because you didn't destroy them? Because I didn't need to," she replied. "Some lessons stay longer when they come wrapped in grace." He studied her face, then shook his head with a soft smile. "You're remarkable, you know that?" She turned slightly, her expression tender. "I'm yours," she said. Outside, dusk was melting into night, the city lights sharpening against the dark. Nathan slid an arm around her waist, pulling her close again as the reflection of their embrace shimmered against the glass. Down below, the whispers continued, threading through the building like wind through leaves. But their tone had changed, less mocking now, more mindful. Respect, newly learned, carried in hushed tones. By the time evening settled, the tower had grown still again. And somewhere in that stillness, the truth of the day lingered, a quiet reminder that power doesn't always need to raise its voice, and dignity, once tested, shines brightest in silence. If this story hit home, pass it on. Somewhere, someone is being talked down to across a shiny desk called sweetheart or delivery girl. Like their worth depends on a label, they need to see that respect doesn't have to be demanded. It can be earned in silence and reclaimed in a single name. Comment below if you've ever been laughed at by the wrong people and watched their faces change when they finally realized who you were. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.